On the 24th of October 1994, one of the most iconic episodes in EastEnders history aired, featuring Grant Mitchell playing a tape to a packed Queen Vic, revealing the affair between his wife, Sharon, and his brother, Phil, bringing an end to a storyline that had gripped the nation for more than 2 years, and eventually saw the temporary departure of original character Sharon Mitchell, as Phil and Grant chose one another over the woman they loved. The love triangle featured three of the biggest characters in the soap's history, and remains an influential and popular story, consistently finding itself among discussions of the top 10 moments in all of British soap. In this video, I'm going to explore what makes Sharongate work so well. We'll talk a bit about the history of the love triangle in fiction, the lead up to Sharongate, including the introduction of the Mitchells, and then we'll finish by talking about what Sharongate is really about, and take a deep dive into the house that trauma built.
She broke my heart, man.
She broke my heart as well. You broke my heart. I bet you've broken hers at some point. So what are we going to do? Are we just three losers screwing each other forever?
Given their dramatic potential, it should be no surprise at all that love triangles tend to feature in soaps with some regularity. Though Sharongate is, I think, far and away the most famous love triangle in British soap, prior to its airing, that title was undoubtedly held by Coronation Street's Mike, Ken, Deirdre storyline, where Ken Barlow's third wife, Deirdre, began an affair with businessman Mike Baldwin. Naturally, the history of the love triangle stretches back to, presumably, the birth of storytelling. Though the trope far precedes it, one of the most famous and influential love triangles in fiction is found in the medieval chivalric story of Tristan and Isolde. Prince Tristan, a heroic knight, embarks on a voyage to Ireland to formally ask the Princess Isolde for her hand on behalf of his uncle, King Mark of Cornwall. On the return journey to Cornwall, the pair mistakenly, although in some versions deliberately, consume a love potion meant for the king and fall in love and begin a relationship. Upon being discovered by the king, Tristan and Isolde flee, but guilt compels them to return, at which point Tristan is banished and Isolde remains with her new husband. Duty and guilt triumph over true love. As is natural with stories as old as Tristan and Isolde, there are various versions with various endings, but one of the things which remains relevant regardless of which version is told is the tragedy of the triangle. Though Tristan and Isolde are in love, both care deeply for King Mark and he for them. Tristan and his uncle's relationship is more akin to that of father and son, and though Isolde cannot reciprocate the love towards her new husband that he has for her, he has shown her nothing but kindness, and she feels very fondly towards him. There are no winners here. Whatever the outcome might have been, everybody would have lost something. That idea is, I think, one of the core components of the love triangle. The other is choice. The vast majority of love triangles are designed to appeal to a female audience, purely because the romance genre has, historically, been a woman's genre. Because of this, female characters tend to be the ones in the triangle presented with the choice of which man she wants to be with. Specifically though, and certainly in recent years, it's been young women who have been targeted by love triangles, most notably in young adult fiction. The Twilight series Bella Edward Jacob triangle was the centre stage for the entire story, but it also played a key point in marketing. I remember when Twilight Mania really took off, and there was lots of attention paid to the idea that fans were either Team Edward or Team Jacob, with the audience becoming just as affected by the dilemma as the character. The Hunger Games also used this as a marketing device, with Katniss's choice between Gale and Peter taking on more importance than a conventional love triangle might. Katniss needs to present a loving relationship with Peter to survive, but she really wants to be with Gale. This element of choice isn't present in all love triangles, but it does seem to be a factor of the ones which become popular and leave a mark on popular culture. The Office, for example, has a love triangle in the form of Tim, Dawn and Lee. Dawn could stay with Lee, but the story is obviously not going to play out that way, and Lee becomes nothing more than an obstacle for the good couple. I was talking to a friend of mine about this, and he coined the term love wedge to describe this trope. It's technically a love triangle, but it's an uneven one. Rose, Cal and Jack from Titanic is another good example. The emphasis of the story is on how Rose breaks away from Cal and moves towards Jack, representing something more than just a romantic relationship. At a bishops' conference for clergy and other ministers in the Diocese of St Albans in 2002, John York, the former executive producer of EastEnders and the BBC head of drama serials, openly revealed that Sharongate had been EastEnders' own take on the Tristan and Isolde story. It's easy to see, with Sharongate's bittersweet tragedy and impossible choice being lifted wholesale from its most famous forebear. As we shall see though, Sharongate puts a twist on an old format. and the result is far more compelling than might have otherwise been.
Phil was different. Why? He just was. I didn't know that the first time. In one minute I was looking at him, in the next, ripping each other's clothes off.
The late 80s marked a low point for EastEnders in its battle with Coronation Street. According to statistics on the excellent fan-made Corrie and EastEnders wiki pages, ratings were down, with an annual average of around 13 million viewers for EastEnders, compared with around 20 million for Coronation Street. The solution was found in a new executive producer, Michael Ferguson. Ferguson had previously been a producer for the ITV drama series, The Bill, which followed the officers of the Sun Hill police station in East London and was frequently lauded for its realistic and heavy-hitting representation of modern life in the city. Crucially, The Bill's depiction challenged an area in which EastEnders had previously been the leader, having since leaned, somewhat unsuccessfully, towards a more comedic angle. Ferguson's changes were seen both on-screen and off, with the way episodes were produced and stories conceptualised being altered significantly, and a more varied amount of locations began to be seen. The result, according to scriptwriter Colin Brake, was a programme with a new sense of vitality and a programme more in touch with the real world than it had been in a while. While many characters were written out, two major characters were introduced in early February of 1990. Modelled in part on traditional East End hardmen like the Cray twins, Phil and Grant Mitchell, played by Steve McFadden and Ross Kemp respectively, were created to bring an air of danger and unpredictability to EastEnders. It's immediate from the off that both men stand out from EastEnders' usual stable of characters. Though both Phil and Grant project a cocky air of light-hearted playfulness, it's very evident that these are two men who know their way around the rougher areas of society. Physically too, they stand out. They very much represent a new type of masculinity, the traditional strongman moulded by the ambitious, loads of money culture of the 80s. The Mitchells moved to Albert Square to pursue potential business opportunities and are almost immediately established as having an eye for women. Sharongate was born with the Mitchell brothers. As EastEnders screenwriter Tony Jordan tells it, the storyline was conceived after it was noted that Sharon Watts was perfect for both men. On a surface level at least, it's a statement that has a lot of truth to it. Phil and Grant are both typically masculine men attracted to pretty blondes, and Sharon, as an attractive blonde barmaid, is very much their sort of woman. But we'll revisit this statement in the next part and look at the deeper attraction between these characters, which I think is a crucial part in fully understanding the meaning of the story. Shortly after arriving, Grant begins a relationship with Sharon, leading to their marriage in 1991. Cracks soon begin to emerge, however, as Grant expects his wife to be a homemaker and a mother, something Sharon refuses to do, instead focusing on making the Queen Vic a success to honour her father Den. Though Grant is keen on having children, Sharon resists, resorting to continue to take her contraceptive pill behind his back, leading to an argument in 1992 where Grant smashes up the Vic before leaving for several weeks. In Grant's absence, Phil and Sharon grow closer, with Phil consoling his brother's wife. When Grant returns, he almost immediately fails in his attempts to be a better husband, neglecting Sharon and spending his time out with friends. It is left to Phil to help Sharon run the Vic, and, after cleaning glasses one night, the pair kiss and their affair begins. Despite her attraction to Phil and Grant's behaviour, Sharon can't bring herself to leave her husband, although the marriage is put under further strain as Grant's actions continue to worsen. He begins to become more actively involved in criminal behaviour, physically intimidates Sharon and her friends, and, unaware that Sharon is inside, sets fire to the Vic in an insurance scam. Appalled at his involvement in a fire that risks the place that was not only her childhood home, but also a reminder of her father, Sharon leaves Grant to stay in America with her mother, returning in 1993 to try and wrestle control of the Vic from Grant. It is at this point that Grant begins to be physically abusive towards Sharon. Concerned by Grant's treatment of Sharon, her best friend, Michelle Fowler, played by Susan Tully, calls the police, leading Grant to lose his temper and badly injure one of the officers and Michelle. Grant is imprisoned, paving the way for Phil and Sharon's affair to escalate. During this period, Grant begins to suspect something is wrong, and both Phil and Sharon are tormented with feelings of guilt. Upon his release, Sharon takes pity on him and recommits to the marriage, with Phil entering into a marriage of convenience with Nadia, played by Anna Barkan, a Romanian refugee seeking a green card, a clear attempt to put up barriers between himself and Sharon. When this marriage quickly collapses, Phil begins a relationship with Kathy Beale, played by Gillian Tailforth, and the two get engaged in 1994. When Sharon hears about the engagement, she visits Phil with the hopes of reigniting their affair, something Phil resists. It is during Phil and Kathy's engagement party that the affair is revealed. On a supply run to a local pub, Grant roots around in the glove box for something to listen to on the journey and stumbles upon a tape he doesn't recognise. Months earlier, Michelle had interviewed Sharon on behalf of her historian boyfriend for a book he was writing on East End women. The interview soon spirals, and before long, Sharon is divulging her affair to Michelle over a bottle of wine. All the while, the recorder is still running. Grant plays the tape, discovers everything, and returns to the party to reveal all. It's really clear why Sharongate was and remains popular. For a start, the stakes are incredibly well established. Grant and Phil aren't just brothers, they're brothers who are incredibly close.
Phil, you slept with Sharon. I had two things in my life that meant anything, you and her.
If the affair is made public knowledge, then there isn't just a marriage that will be destroyed, but the Mitchells' relationship. Both Sharon and Phil have a huge amount to lose. It also helps that, like Tristan and Isolde, all the people involved in the love triangle love one another. Phil and Grant as brothers, and Sharon, though in a very difficult and flagrantly abusive marriage with Grant, is still sympathetic and fond of him. Nobody is going to win this because everybody is going to lose something. There is no happy ending to be had here. Another element of the love triangle trope that factors into the storyline's success is that of the choice. While this is something I want to talk about further in the next part, it is clear that one of the things that resonated with audiences, especially women, is the question of who they would choose if they were in Sharon's position. Do they go for the rugged, masculine Grant, or the more tender and sympathetic Phil? It's a testament to the values dissonance of the period that picking Grant, a man with a violent temper and a history of domestic abuse, was considered somewhat valid. Sharon's part in this should also be emphasised. We've known her since EastEnders began, back when she was a teenager and dealing with difficult parents. The audience has had almost a decade to grow attached to Sharon. That's a long time to know someone for, and naturally, we feel protective of her. As Sally Vincent, writer for The Guardian, argues, Sharongate's success wasn't so much the guilt-stacked, long-drawn-out business of Sharon and Phil's helpless lust for each other that broke the ratings record, nor was it the ingenious ruse of using a tape to broadcast Sharon's poignant little confession to the entire clientele of Walford's Queen Vic. It was the fact that we'd all watched Sharon grow up. We knew that she was a nice little person, vulnerable, brave, sweet-natured, and kind to the dog. We were sorry for her. Neither of those Mitchells deserved her, so when one punched the other into the garage pit and half killed him for tampering with his lady wife, we didn't much care. We were sorry to see Sharon go. Though Vincent doesn't give it much credit, she does mention another reason for Sharongate's success, the reveal. Much like that of Max and Stacey some 13 years later, Sharongate's reveal is to a packed house of people, most of whom are only observers, but add to the overall impact of the scene by their presence. This isn't revealed in a private conversation, but in a public arena, where Sharon's own words, from her own mouth, out the whole thing, and neither she nor Phil can escape the shame, shock, and judgment of everybody they know. I do want to mention that, while all the performances are worthy of note, Ross Kemp's has always struck out to me. He's a great one for eye acting and conveys so much in that reveal scene. There's grief and pain, anger and sorrow, humiliation and self-pity. So much is conveyed. It's a real acting achievement. You can't tell whether he's going to burst into tears or start throwing punches. So, yeah, 3 great characters, clear stakes, good performances, a textbook reveal, and plenty of room for audience investment all make Sharongate work. That's obvious, though. You don't need me to tell you that because you already knew it. That's not what this video is really about, though. What this video is really about is the core of Sharongate.
I just wanted a chance to put things right, you know?
How do you mean?
Make that happen for my kids. Only keep it like that.
Like your mum and dad did?
No.
Sharongate only happens because of the trauma each of the 3 characters have experienced. Trauma and abuse may not be the first thing we think about when we talk about Sharon, but it is a factor. In 2002, she and Phil discussed their childhoods.
I've lost count of the times I used to sit in my room listening to them arguing, and the door would open and I'd hear Dad shouting, Mum crying, door slamming.
We saw that firsthand. We've seen what Den and Angie were like. We saw the arguments and the adultery and know full well that Den and Angie's relationship had settled to the point of death by the time we meet them. Sharon herself says that when her parents were fighting, they tried to win her over as a way of scoring points against the other.
I'd walk in for breakfast to a barrage of sweethearts and darlings from both of them, both wanting to outdo the other one, worried I'd take sides.
And she tells us that Angie idolised Den only to be consistently let down by him.
Me and Mum used to curl up on the sofa, picking out on chocolate, watching old black and white films on the telly. When the hero got his girl in the end, she was right in there with him. That's what she wanted, and it couldn't be further away from what she had.
Even though Sharon describes her childhood as happy, and both her parents definitely loved her, this is not an ideal environment to be raised in, especially when it comes to a person's view on relationships. I don't think that, given this background, it's particularly surprising that Sharon remains with Grant despite his abusive behaviour. When it comes to Grant, both he and Phil were raised in an extremely abusive household and lived in the shadow of their violent father, Eric. According to Sharon, Grant spoke highly of his father, and Phil maintains that Grant escaped the worst of it. Nevertheless, Eric's view of women and his treatment of his wife Peggy had to have an effect on Grant's own view of relationships. His frustration at Sharon for resisting the role he wants to create for her, and the very fact he's so keen to have her in that role in the first place, is absolutely something he picked up in childhood. His overbearing attitude and jealousy towards Sharon is a result of insecurity. Insecurity that he picked up from his father, who exerted complete control over Peggy. Grant's attitude to women and family is summed up in a scene after the affair is revealed, where Phil is in hospital recovering from a fight. Grant forces him to lie and say that Sharon was the instigator. The alternative, that a member of his family as close to him as Phil betrayed him, is simply too much to bear. It doesn't stop there for Grant, though. He joined the army and fought in the Falklands War, and came back, like many soldiers do, with PTSD. In fact, such is Grant's PTSD that when he attempts to re-enlist in 1990, the army refuses him because he fails a psychiatric test. Having taken so much from him, the army no longer wants him because he has nothing to offer them, no doubt adding to his frustration. It's Phil who is the most interesting of the three, though, and where we find the true meaning behind Sharongate. I mentioned earlier that Sharongate does have the choice as a core element of the love triangle, but with Sharongate, the character who has to make the important choice isn't Sharon, it's Phil. Phil Mitchell might be one of the best representations of toxic masculinity in television. He's spoken about his childhood abuse a number of times since he was introduced, and it's clear that physical violence was a major part of his early life.
I remember one Christmas day as he took his belt off. My little legs, they were shaking so much I thought they were going to give way. I think he must have seen me, my lip trembling. I choked back the tears because he screamed at me. Well, he always screamed. Be a man.
Worth noting that the language Eric uses, specifically the phrase, be a man, and the way he acts, shows that he shaped his son's view of masculinity, a masculinity that struggles with emotions and views violent action as an appropriate reaction to problems. Phil mentions during this scene that his dad started beating him when he began to act out and get into scraps at school. Instead of having a talk with his son, Eric used violence because he wasn't emotionally equipped to have that conversation. There's lots to unpack and appreciate about this scene. In my view, it's one of EastEnders' best, and I highly recommend you check it out for yourself, if only for the excellent performance from Steve McFadden. We've also seen it for ourselves. In the EastEnders 2022 flashback special, one of the things that's really noticeable about this episode is a clear disparity in the physicality between Eric and his sons. Listening to Phil talk about him, and with his reputation being what it is, I assumed that Eric would be built in much the same way Phil and Grant are. Instead, we're presented with a somewhat scrawny guy, whose alcohol abuse has clearly taken a toll on him, a clear contrast with his sons, who are already displaying the same physical masculinity they have since they joined EastEnders. When Phil attacks his father at the end of the episode, it's the first time he stood up to his dad, but this is something that, physically at least, he could have done a long time ago. Psychologically, however, he has only now gotten to the point where he can do something like this. Even then, though, it's clear from actor Daniel Delaney's excellent performance that Phil is terrified at the prospect of being beaten. Even though he's far more physically capable than his dad, when he's put in this position, Phil goes right back to being that little kid at Christmas again. It's only when Peggy is harmed that Phil is able to defend himself. If it wasn't for that, then it's doubtful Phil would have reacted to his father's abuse any differently than he has done for his entire life up to that point. What's interesting is that, despite this moment, Phil's abuse continues to haunt him. This incident does absolutely nothing to help Phil recover from his trauma.
I think that hurt me more than anything else. He was like a god, you know. And there he was, just a pathetic old man.
It should be said that Eric wasn't the only damaging influence on the Mitchell brothers. Peggy did her part too. Yes, I know we all love Peggy, Peggy's great, but I know I'm not the first person to suggest that a lot of her brazen and outspoken attitude comes from the security she feels knowing that she has two strong sons to back her up. The Mitchell obsession with family comes from her, and while it seems like a good thing to put family above all others, it's really unhealthy to prioritise the needs of your family above your own. A great example of this is when Peggy is told that Sharon's affair was with Phil, not just some random guy. At first, her advice is that Grant and Sharon should make amends, and that a silly affair that means nothing isn't anything to be concerned about.
It doesn't have to be the end, you know. Affairs happen. You might still be able to work it out. You need to talk it through, find out why, put back what was missing. Maybe it was a cry for help.
Family comes before Grant's feelings. Then, Peggy finds out that the person Sharon had the affair with was Phil.
What's going on?
Oh, you dirty little sod.
You don't know what she's like. It could have been anybody.
But it wasn't anyone, was it? It was your brother. Families always come first. You were taught that before you could walk. I treated that girl like one of my own, like a daughter. Well, she's made a right prat out of me. I'll make her wish she'd never been born.
Now it's an issue, and Sharon needs to go. Phil's status as brother trumps Sharon's status as wife. Phil is a Mitchell by blood, Sharon is only a Mitchell by law. What's important is that Phil seems to have some understanding of his trauma and how it affects him. It pops up every now and then in conversations later on, but the fact that he has enough emotional intelligence to reach out and support Sharon when Grant neglects her is a good indication that there's more to Phil than we see. In 1997, after the birth of Phil and Kathy's son, Ben, Phil's alcoholism begins to affect his family, and he's encouraged to join a therapy group.
Because he's scared, and he's scared to admit that he's scared, and because he's out to pretend that he don't need or care about no one, when deep down inside he's hurting so bad he could scream.
People used to say to my old lady, it's just like his dad and he. They didn't know how right they were.
The fact he's speaking about his trauma suggests that this is something he thinks about, to some extent at least. Phil knows that something is wrong. He knows that his childhood has shaped him for the worst, but he lacks the skills to really explore it, or fully change for the best. As writer and former EastEnders actress Jaquetta May says, "The East End boy is put in an alien and uncomfortable arena where men are forced to talk about their problems and expose their vulnerability. Meanwhile, Kathy and Pat re-examine past mistakes, and agree that life is hell, but you've got to keep struggling, mend the electrics and have a laugh. The reward for talk is quick. After only one counselling session, Phil is able to reveal the basis of his problem. His father had beaten him as a kid, and he fears that he will do the same to his son. The episode blames his destructiveness on the male response to self-hate, violence. It says that unless problems are worked through the female method, they will be repeated generation after generation." So when it comes to applying this to Sharongate, what we have is a character being presented with the opportunity to move on from his trauma, but being unable to fully break from it. As much as Phil loves his brother, Grant represents that loving and loyal but not particularly healthy family dynamic and abusive past. And Sharon, who Phil can open up to and who is sympathetic enough to relate and listen to him, represents moving away from that. Phil's choice is emblematic of who he really is. Though he recognises his trauma and the role it's played in shaping him, he's not quite able to fully make the break. Though Phil is toxic masculinity personified, he has broken away from the worst of his father's impulses. And though he's not a perfect person and is still abusive and violent, not to mention falling back on substance abuse as a coping mechanism, he has done something generations of Mitchell men have failed to do. Phil's father hit him, and Eric's father hit him, and so on and so on. But when Ben is born, Phil speaks about how he doesn't want to be the same kind of father to his son that Eric was to him. When he hits Ben, after Ben hurts his sister Louise, Phil is horrified at himself. Did Eric ever have a moment like this? I doubt it. Still, the poison drips down. While Phil has rejected the worst parts of his father, he still had an effect on his son. A lot of fun is poked at this line from 2010, where Ben attacks Jordan Johnson.
You need slapping down.
But there's a reason why it sounds so silly. Ben is only speaking like that because Phil speaks like that. That moment is a 14-year-old boy trying to sound like his dad, and it sounds ridiculous because Ben is not Phil. Ben likes Lady Gaga and Doctor Who and hanging out with Heather. And while Phil accepts this better than his father would have, he still has views of what his son should be, what a man should be, what a Mitchell should be. It's that attitude that leads to Ben killing Heather, a woman who was once his best friend. When his father confronts him over it, Ben argues that she was going to grass him up, an act the Mitchells have often spoken about as the one thing you never do.
She grassed me up. You would have done the same. You was gonna kill me then.
That face is Phil realising, perhaps for the first time, the extent of what he's done to his son.
Do you know why? Hey, because of me. Me. Look what I've made you into. Look what I've done.
He went out of his way to teach Ben that violence, and arguably criminality itself, was an intrinsic part of being a man. Even with Heather's murder, Ben is markedly healthier than his father. It's not perfect, but progress has been made. That's really Phil Mitchell's legacy. I enjoy the memes as much as anyone, but there's more to him than just an angry, bold man who occasionally indulges in a bit of crack.
Tell you what, that crack is really Moorish.
He's a great character in his own right, and a brilliant representation of toxic masculinity and the effect generational trauma has on a person. He appreciates enough about why he is the way he is, and has taken enough of a stand against it, that Ben is far less damaged than his father. As a result of that, Ben's children will be far less damaged than their father, and so on and so on. Sharongate is more than just a good storyline with a great reveal. It's a moment in these people's lives that could have only happened to them because of the traumas that came before. And it's a great summary of who Phil Mitchell is. When Phil has the affair with Sharon, he shows that he's willing to change. When he opts to remain with Grant, he shows that he's not fully able to. Soaps run for an age, and an actor like Steve McFadden is probably going to be in it for the long haul. So we can't really appreciate Phil Mitchell until his time in EastEnders is over. When that day comes, I think we'll see just what a strong character Phil Mitchell really is. Maybe even the strongest in EastEnders history, and not just because it's fun to watch him threaten Ian Beale. Phil's story is one of coming to terms with trauma the best you can, and making a decision not to pass it on. He's not perfect, but Phil Mitchell did what countless generations of Mitchell men before him never managed to do. And sometimes, that's all you need to change the tide.
They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had, and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself.
Hi guys, thanks for watching. A bit of a shorter video this time, but it was really interesting to go back and look at Sharongate again. Really is one of the best storylines EastEnders has ever done, and it's just great to see how good soap can be. Thanks very much to my patron who voted on this episode. The next video has already been voted on, so I'm going to start work on that pretty soon. So thanks very much. Bye.